Welcome to Slice Serve, a new tennis podcast by tennis nerds for wannabe tennis nerds. This is your place to satisfy your curiosity and leave feeling just a little bit smarter and appreciative of this game that we all love. Let's get started. Okay, welcome to our main slice. So this is where we go deep on a topic of choice. And for our first episode, we wanted to start with a topic every tennis fan knows about. So we're going to dunk ourselves into the concept of the tennis Grand Slam. So we're going to cover a few interesting things about these events, and hopefully at the end, you leave having learned something new. So let's dive right in.
Yeah, so let's kick this off with a little bit of history.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So tennis, believe it or not, is very, very old. You know, there are references back to the 12th century of people playing tennis. And there are references in a Shakespeare play of the exact word tennis. Now, interestingly, tennis used to be played indoors. But not in the way that you might be familiar with an indoor court. This was like a room with inside like a royalty's palace, and that's where tennis was played for a very long time until some clever person in the late 1800s said, "You know what? We should take this outdoor." And so they built up a kit that they started selling, and they called it lawn tennis, and which is kind of the tennis that we think of today and play today, actually, because and it was kind of an invention, and so of course the prefix lawn has been dropped since then because that's the de facto now. But someone tried to patent this concept, but in about 3 years it sort of fell off the radar. But there were a bunch of tournaments that were going on already for many years. And the major countries sort of came together and in quick succession made up these tournaments that were like the major championships. So like Wimbledon is actually the oldest one, and it was founded in 1877, but clearly this idea was something that was in progress and in people's collective minds already, because it was quickly followed by a championship in the US in 1881, like literally 4 years after. And then of course the French had one in 1891, so in another 10 years, and then the Australian in 1905. So these all sort of became major championships in tennis. So that's kind of an interesting sort of backstory here, but cool.
It's amazing. It's over almost 150 years of tennis that we know about as of today, which is pretty impressive. So let's talk a little bit about Grand Slam, the term itself. So what's the origin here, Ravi?
So let's start by describing a major, which is generally interchangeable with the concept of a slam. And a major is essentially one of these primary tournaments, the four important ones. Now, a Grand Slam is commonly used these days, and actually inaccurately, because even by famous people like McEnroe. I don't know why I said famous, but McEnroe is famous. He doesn't need air quotes, but a Grand Slam is actually winning all four majors in the same calendar year. Yeah, so in fact, individual tournaments should be called a Grand Slam tournament. And as opposed to when we say Grand Slam, generally it's supposed to mean precisely all four tournaments at the same time. Now, where does this term come from? Well, it comes from this card game called Contract Bridge. Have you played Contract Bridge, Raghu?
I know of the bridge as a game, but I have not played the contracts. I don't know what the contract part of this is. but it seems awfully
Yeah, I'm very curious.
complex and overwhelming to me right now.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a while since I played any card game. I think these days it's like Magic and those types of card games. But in contract bridge, when you win all 13 tricks with a single hand, apparently, that's when it's called a Grand Slam. And that term was first borrowed for golf. And in 1930, someone named Bobby Jones actually swept all 4 of the titles in golf in the same year, and basically was said to have won a Grand Slam. And so 3 years later, in 1933, someone named Jack Crawford actually won in tennis the Australasian Championship, and then the French Championship, and then the championship in Wimbledon. So Jack won all 3. And so Alan Gould, who was a writer of the newspaper called the Reading Eagle, stated that Jack could actually win a Grand Slam if he also won the US Championship. So that's, in our research, that was like the earliest reference we found. So this was kind of the time when the word Grand Slam started being applied to tennis.
I think there's a few observations here. One, I noticed that it used to be called Australasian Championships, and Australia obviously just dropped the Asian part of it. So it's interesting, like for tennis, they dropped it, but for soccer, they want to be part of the Asian group. That's how they actually qualify for the World Cup. So it's kind of convenience, if you will. Two.
Wow, so you're telling me that today's Australian Open should really be called Australasian Open and kind of include the Asian countries in there too?
Yeah, they call it, I think,
Wow.
the
Right,
championships of the Pacific something. So it's sort of like from a marketing purposes. And the other interesting aspect here is, like, I think we have taken over Grand Slam as a term completely and owning it as in tennis. I don't think they use it as much in golf anymore. I think contract bridge is probably I don't know much about it, so I can't really comment on it. And so it seems like we want to use it. We want to use it willy-nilly, left and right. Even McEnroe obviously is doing it wrong, at least definitely in this case. So it's
Yeah, I mean, mark my words, Raghu. I think there will be a resurgence of contract bridge in 2030, and I think we're going to run into trademark issues. Anyway, so that's a slam. But Raghu, what's the skinny on how the 4 came together? Like, how did these 4 tournaments become the slams?
As I was digging into doing some research on it, of course, there's no one conclusive evidence of how all this came together. I had to stitch it from different sources. It's kind of fascinating when you go back in time. Back then, Britain is ruled in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They ruled most big parts of the world. So they took tennis everywhere, and it grew in popularity. So initially, the British and the French federations, they met in 1912 along with, Australian, Belgian, Spanish, Denmark, Danish and German federations. And they formed this federation called ILTF, International Lawn Tennis Federation. And they wanted to create the idea of the World Championships because they wanted players to compete across these different countries and crown a champion. They identified one from grass, which is Wimbledon, another one from hard court, which is French back then, and then also a covered tournament on a wooden surface, interestingly enough. And US, as usual, over the years, they disagreed and they didn't want to join. I think it's not changed even today. So as the US, but US and Australia were the places where tennis grew really rapidly in popularity. And some of the best players were playing in these countries, but not playing on those French and Wimbledon championships. So they couldn't really crown a world champion, if you will. So ILTF was forced to back down, and the strategy has not changed even today. and they convinced US and Australia to join hands, and they dropped the World Championships terminology, and then said, let's call it the official championships. So they created this, and they said, okay, we'll pick one tournament from each of the 4 countries. So Australia, France, England, and US, and then they call themselves the majors. So that's how it all began, and even to this day, it's not actually changed.
Wow.
And
That's some pretty solid history. Sounds like there were a lot of different entities involved as well in this whole process.
yeah, it is politically, the political powers, if you will, actually got together to make this kind of happen back then. Also, they had economic power too, and so that's how the origins were for Grand Slam tournaments. And today, I think it's awfully difficult to have like a fifth major, and it's probably a topic for the future.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's. I mean, you highlight this interesting fact that these. I think there's a historic aspect to this, which we sort of romanticize today. But if we were back in that age, I wonder if these were the four powerful countries, and they just sort of made up the four Grand Slams, and it's no longer trivial or possible even, I wonder, to have a fifth one. So there's a lot. It's a huge, complicated topic. So I would love for us to dive into that in the future.
So Ravi, I want to test you on a fun fact here.
Ooh, okay.
What is the minimum age to play a Grand Slam tournament? And to sort of like
minimum age.
To cue this, let's just share some like young players that we know of that start playing tennis. What comes to your mind?
Yeah. Well, I think like I was going to say, because I do remember some very young players. Let's see, the ones that popped to mind, Michael Chang was 17. I remember this against Ivan Lendl where he did that crazy underarm serve, but he was 17. I know Martina Hingis used to play when she was very young. The Williams sisters were very young. I watched the documentary, but I don't know if I had to pick a number, maybe 15?
You're pretty close. And some of the players that I know of, Jennifer Capriati at 15, of course, Boris Becker at 17 years, 7 months, 7 days, won Wimbledon. I remember that. So there's definitely some players. Yeah. Aaron Krickstein, I think, was 16 or so from the US. But the minimum age to play Grand Slam is 14.
14.
If you had to be 14 or older to play in the main draw of one of the Grand Slam tournaments. The youngest one, you're right, is Martina Hingis, who turned pro at 14 years old. Venus was also 14, a little bit older, but 14. Tracy Austin at 16 years, 8 months. Some of these are the youngest ones.
Got it. Wait, so you have to be at least 14 to play in a Grand Slam tournament. And I think by that time you need to have turned pro already, I imagine, right? So that means otherwise you would be playing a junior tournament. Okay, so you have to turn pro first, and you can be 14. You need to be 14. So you need to have turned pro, I guess, when you were 13. Yeah, I was still in diapers when I was 13. So wow, I don't feel very good about this fact.
Hey, you could win both the seniors and the juniors at 14. So if you had a chance, that'd be kind of fun.
Oh my, I wonder if anyone's ever done that. I don't think that's possible, though. I think you have to pick one or the other. So amazing.
Yeah. So we want to like dig into what makes Wimbledon so special. We all know Wimbledon. We love Wimbledon in many different ways, but we want to go back a little bit into history and research and just like understand like what made it so special all through the years. So I want to share some cool stats here. One is, as Ravi earlier mentioned, Wimbledon is the oldest of the Grand Slam tournaments. It's founded in 1877. What really blows my mind is it's older than the modern Olympic Games, which actually started in 1896. So there you go. So tennis has one leg up there on Olympics. So it's at least 22 years.
You know what? That just made me think of. So the Olympics originated in Greece, right?
That's right.
I wonder if Greece has ever felt like they should have a Grand Slam.
That's an interesting thought there, but it's people tend to forget that tennis has been around for such a long time. It's amazing history.
Yeah.
And if you think about the first tournament in Wimbledon that happened, there are only 22 players who got invited, and they're all amateurs at that point because there's no professional, there's no money. and there were only a crowd of 200 people who showed up to see the game, all the matches. And there's no seating, mostly standing room only. They had
200.
Yeah, they put in like 3 wooden planks on the court, on one of the courts, so like 30 people could sit. That's about it. So it's crazy. It's just back then when they started it all. And the entrance fee was 11 shillings. It was meager.
Oh my.
And the first tournament was won.
11 shillings in the 1800s though, right? So I don't know. I don't know what that translates to, but it's shillings. So with 200 players, that's interesting because I feel like I was just in the 1 square meter that I stood in Indian Wells just this year. I feel like there were 200 people. So that's insane.
It's crazy. And
that was the total
it was
crowd
for the whole tournament. And so the first tournament was won by a man named Spencer Gore, and the Wimbledon was covered by a magazine, actually sponsored by a magazine called The Field, and they said this. Spencer Gore. He said he displayed great activity, covering an enormous area of ground and returning many balls which seems impossible to reach. He also played extremely well with his head.
Wait, that sounds like they're covering Alcaraz.
And this is like one of the earliest sort of collaborations feel between media and tennis. And even to this day, that relationship is very strong. So you can go back to the roots there.
Wow, that's
yeah. So
amazing.
The first broadcast of this Wimbledon tournament was in 1937 by BBC, and their coverage was, believe it or not, just for 30 minutes. Today, over 80 TV networks carry it live in 200 plus countries, 24-hour coverage, and just the center court itself has 120 commentators.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that's also interesting that there's so many networks carrying. I mean, it does complicate things for us tennis fans because sometimes I don't know what channel I need to have to go watch a particular tournament, and I also sometimes feel like I have the inverse problem where I have Tennis Channel, and in the early parts of these major tournaments, there are like 15 games going on at the same time, and I want to watch all of them, but I cannot.
Yeah, it's. I think you're talking 120 commentators, but I'm sure there are many more bloggers out there. So if you look at media coverage, there's much
Yes.
more. So as we said earlier, 11 shilling for entrance fee to the 1877 edition. Today, you only had to pay about 230 pounds for the cheapest tickets on the center court for the finals.
Oh my goodness! And this is so the cheapest Wimbledon ticket is 230
for the center
pounds
for the finals.
Oh wow!
But you could go and pay nothing, nada, and watch the game on the center court. All you gotta do, it's open for general public, and it's been there since 1924. And this is fascinating. And so you just need to go stand overnight in a line, a queue, and first come first serve, you will get the tickets to the center court, which is brilliant.
Oh wow! Wait, so there's I wonder if these lines are like the Apple Store lines, just going on and round and round and round the blocks. Because it's Wimbledon,
actually better.
right?
That's right. It's actually better because Wimbledon actually gives you all sort of support, water, this food, all kinds of services to make it a bit easier on you to stay through the night. So you stand overnight, and the next morning you get the tickets.
Amazing. So I stand overnight for however long, and I get a ticket for zero pounds.
Free.
Completely free? Fascinating. Well, little known fact though, Raghu, I'm almost certain that the Ticketmaster processing fees is probably 400 pounds for that free ticket.
No, I think you just get a paper ticket is my guess there. So
cool.
Yeah.
What about I'm curious actually, like does there any relationship with the Wimbledon and the rules of tennis?
Yeah, so Wimbledon, like the rules came actually from the game of cricket, interestingly, and the initial rules were put together by MCC, the Marylebone Cricket Club, which actually controlled tennis back then, which is kind of fascinating.
That is fascinating. Well, interestingly, it's not golf or contract bridge, but the rules came from cricket. Like, I don't know what to think anymore.
Yeah, so the back then, the Melbourne Cricket Club got involved because they were trying to influence the games of rackets and tennis, and it was a new name, and they got involved, and they set the initial set of rules. Their committee got together and set the tennis rules. Not even like the other clubs there seemed to dissent, and they just accepted it and they just moved on. So that was kind of fascinating to begin with.
Amazing. So it's interesting though. I don't see any terminology from cricket make it into tennis. So it just so happens that the cricket club made the original rule book or something.
Yeah, I think that's a topic for another day, because I'm sure if you go back into the origins of the scoring system and some of the rules, we'll trace it back to some aspects of cricket. But here's another fun fact. The oldest tennis sponsor is a company called Slazenger. It's a British company. They have been sponsoring Wimbledon since 1902. They used to make tennis rackets.
Wow.
They make tennis balls and apparel and so forth. They got bought over by another company that also owns Dunlop today. But they're founded in 1881, and it's just over 100 years old, almost 125 years old of sponsorship. And so this is again another example of how commercial sponsorship came into play and support tennis all these years. It's the oldest sponsor of any kind that we know of. Some of the other ones that are older or are old and also famous are Philips, the Dutch company. They have been sponsoring PSV, the soccer team, since 1913. And Coca-Cola, the very more famous one, has been sponsoring Olympics since 1928.
That's cool. That is very cool. Actually, it's kind of interesting because like these sponsors these days now, I feel like they've become synonymous. Like with some players, like my son can say, like if you say a sponsor, he says a player, and vice versa. So clearly, like the association works. And Slazenger, I remember from my childhood seeing that. I feel like they used to have a logo similar to Puma, but they were. I remember thinking like, oh, that's a cool brand, especially had a Z in the name. I thought it was very cool, and I wanted something with that name, but I haven't seen it in the States anywhere.
Yeah, it's fascinating what Wimbledon has done with it, with this sponsorship, because Slazenger would have actually gone away a long time ago. They became a fairly small company, but they want to maintain the relationship with Slazenger, and so they made extra efforts to keep them as a sponsor. Unlike in today's world, every couple of years you have change in sponsorship. But Wimbledon want to stay true to the tradition. They said, let's just continue the relationship, and they have kept it on even to this day, which is incredible. So let's do a little bit of segue here into what we call a hard fact. Ravi?
Oh yeah, well this was something I had for you, Raghu. Like, can you guess what is the minimum ranking you need to have to play a Grand Slam?
So putting on my thinking hat here, there are 128 players in a Grand Slam, so I was thinking maybe you ought to be there in the first, 200 to even get a chance.
Yeah, I think that's a good line of thinking. The official Grand Slam PDF rulebook says you need to be ranked 500 or higher. So it's a bit more welcoming than that. Of course, if you're ranked 501, you're out of luck. Or if you're ranked like me, I think I'm ranked world 368,000. Which might be overstating my ranking, but yeah, I know we haven't gotten into the topic of rankings itself, but assuming the existence of some way to rank players, you need to be 500 or higher. So I thought that was an interesting fact again. Yeah, the Grand Slam rulebook PDF was good bedtime reading.
It's But I hear all these wild cards that get into the tournaments. I don't. Some of them they say unranked, so I don't know what they mean by unranked. Like they literally are not even in the whatever 10,000, 36,000 ranking. Because I think the rule book is one thing, but Grand Slams tournaments may be following a different rule book.
Oh, that's true. There's like a little side channel there. You're right, because there's other concepts called protected ranking that I think we should dive into someday. Because like Rafa is ranked very low now because he has not been playing, but he's being invited, into all these tournaments with a protected ranking. So maybe that's what I'll claim. I'll claim a protected ranking.
It's good stuff. Good stuff. So we covered Wimbledon, and we want to move on to this concept of Open. We hear this U.S. Open, French Open, Australian Open. What is this Open, and how did this come about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, if you've been digging into tennis at any level, you may have encountered this phrase called the Open Era. And oftentimes, like whether it's statistics or rankings or what have you, are generally counted in the Open Era, quote unquote. So we've sort of taken this for granted. So what exactly is that, though? So I think we should start at the beginning. One interesting fact is that not everyone actually got to play in these tournaments. Players were actually divided into these categories. They're either amateurs or professionals or pros. And this feels like something that's obvious today, at least in the English sense. But it was significant because an amateur cannot be paid to play. You can't teach. You cannot be promoted by Schlesinger. And you cannot play exhibition matches. So, and why this is because it was all considered due to the purity of the sport. So, you were only allowed to play the Grand Slam tournaments, and believe it or not, these Grand Slam tournaments had no prize money. So, imagine Novak playing the Australian Open for $0. Like it doesn't compute. Whereas the professionals or the pros, of course, are paid to play, and they were compensated by the sponsors for showing up. And interestingly, they did not get to play in the slams, as you might have guessed by now. They played in an entirely different set of tournaments. So, some interesting facts is that as a result of this, some players that are popular now were actually amateurs back in the day, and some others were pros, and some like Rod Laver, whom like the main stadium in the Australian Open is actually named after. He played as both. And I'll get to how that is. So, but this is kind of mind-boggling, right? Because if you think about it today, you might actually start wondering, like, how did the amateurs even make any money?
Yeah, it's. I'll be curious to know, like, how they actually got all the resources, financial resources, the amateurs, that is, to travel to these far-off countries back then to play these tournaments. Because it's one thing to play for fun, entertainment, and to actually travel and deal with the rigors of playing tennis and across different parts of the world.
Well, they were playing for prestige. That was definitely one aspect of all of this. And so, hey, if I won the Wimbledon and I got to say it, and even if I was paid nothing, that was what they were going for. So, but one interesting thing is that as this kept happening in the early 1900s towards the 50s and so on, there was this article I unearthed on ESPN Classic. It's like a reference to old historic moments. There was a sentence where it said it's well known that amateurs bargain for amateurs, mind you, and they receive exorbitant expenses to compete at many tournaments. And these are amateurs, so this idea that amateurs who were not supposed to be paid, they were playing for the purity of the game, were actually getting paid under the table. This used to be called shamateurism, which I thought was an awesome portmanteau. Yeah, so basically everybody started to acknowledge that this is all broken, because the slams were consistent, but pro tennis was quite fragmented, different tours, etc. And as you referred to before, Raghu, there were all these different governing bodies. Some were okay with shamateurism, wink wink, and then others were fed up with it, and they wanted to combine everything and call it open tennis. And So the reason for this was this. Basically, the sentiment was that the rules that governed an honorable amateur were basically unenforceable. That's what they thought. So I like the analogy of like it was sort of like sending my kid to a Krispy Kreme. You know, it's this amazing Krispy Kreme store, and I tell him, hey, you can look at all the donuts and you can say you attended this Krispy Kreme store, but you cannot eat any donuts.
That'll not go well with my kids.
And you know what? He's going to find a way. He's going to find a way to eat a donut. So, in fact, a 1969 Australian newspaper article that I found said that the future of the game was at stake.
I wonder what would be going through the minds of the tournament directors of these prestigious majors, Wimbledon, French, and so forth, because they were, could argue, making reasonable amount of money, not like today's money, and none of that was going back to the players. So there's got to be some tension there between people who perform and people who are actually getting rewarded, kind of mismatch.
That's a really good point, and I'm actually not even sure where the money for these tournaments came from, because I couldn't find in my research like if there were sponsors for these tournaments, but there were only sponsors for players, but that was in the Pro Tour. So I think they were sort of like holding on to this idea of the purity of this game. But anyway, in the midst of all of this, basically the British Lawn Tennis Association, it's the association that ran Wimbledon, they basically said, hey, let's end all this hypocrisy and shamateurism. We should create open tennis. It was super political, right? So there was support from like amateur stars. So Arthur Ashe and Billie Jean King, big names. They used to be amateur stars, which means they were not paid to play. But they actually supported this idea of creating open tennis, meaning combining everything. But the ILTF that you referenced, Raghu, they were actually against it. So the ILTF was sort of like forced to reconsider, like they were worried about a mutiny. So there was, anyway, it all comes down to like there was this meeting in March of 1968, and there were these 47 member nations of the ILTF. So these are all the different countries that were sending players to different tournaments. And there was an emergency meeting where all of these nations basically decided that they're going to, remove or withdraw their opposition to this combination, and so hence the open era was born. And just mind you, as I meant these countries that also sent players, these were countries sending amateur players, but there was pride in the fact that, hey, this player is from like whatever, let's say Germany, and so they were being paid to travel, but they were amateurs. So anyway, all of this came, and they all agreed, you know what, just let's end this hypocrisy. And so the Open Era was born, the championships were renamed, and now they were called, as we know today, the French Open, the US Open, and Australian Open. So the first Open Era event was actually in 1968, was the British Hardcourt Championships in April, but that was somewhere in Bournemouth, England. But any guesses, Raghu, like which was the first Open Grand Slam tournament?
I was thinking that given the history of Wimbledon, they would be the first one. I can't think of it.
That's a good guess. That's what I thought too, but it turns out it was actually the French Open in 1968 May. So, and interestingly, both of these two Open Era events were won by Ken Rosewall. He used to be a pro before, and I guess everyone just became, I don't know what they're called anymore, like tennis players, athletes? I don't know. So anyway, but that's how things came about.
Yeah, as I think about the term open, maybe it's back then, at least in Wimbledon, you had to be invited to play, and you're an amateur. So right. I think the federations or the ones that actually ran these tournaments, they were inviting people to come and play based on popularity, based on expertise. So it was certainly like you had to be in this special like books to get to play. I think there's another angle to it.
Amazing.
I think once we went to Open Era, you just need to be ranked high enough and you have a shot to come in. So it's purely based on performance. and not be in the good books of anyone for that matter. I think there's that aspect of open also today. So anyone across anywhere in the world will be guaranteed to play in the tournament if you're above a certain rank, which is, I think, awesome for meritocracy.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It does remind me that, it's still not all roses, because if you remember, Russian and Belarusian players were not allowed in Wimbledon specifically. And so there was a disagreement there. The ATP said, "Hey, what the hell?" But Wimbledon said, "No way." And I think so this is all this politics, which I find really fascinating. But that's a really good point, Raghu.
Yeah, I think that's one of the
I do hope
instances when I think politics kind of played a role, but by and far, I think folks who have ranked above a certain level get in irrespective of any other criteria.
I just hope someday I get invited to at least play contract bridge at Wimbledon.
I'm sure they play bridge in that Wimbledon tennis club there. So you just need to be ranked, Ravi, higher than whatever.
Yeah. I'd be lucky if I get a contract to build a bridge.
I think your best chance to be a wild card in that and win the tricks.
That's right.
All right.
Also, I just to close that thought on the open era, right? I mean, this we're talking 1968, so everything is cool today, right? It's open tennis, everybody can play. No, well, fragmentation is still a thing today. And I don't know if you've been following the news, just earlier this year, I think it was in March, the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund is actually proposing a new Masters level tournament before the Australian Open. And the Grand Slam tournaments, especially the Australian Open, is actually opposed to this, but the ATP, which supports the players, we'll get into all these terms in the future podcast probably, but they are for it. So, and there's still a lot of turmoil in terms of the tennis calendar and what happens when and who wins what and who gets to play what and who gets to sponsor what and who gets the money. And everything looks great if you're just following the Grand Slams, but you start digging in a little deeper, and I was surprised to find all sorts of turmoil. But but that was a lot of stuff. What do we get through?
Yeah, we learned the term Grand Slam and what exactly it is and how it came about. We covered how the 4 slams actually came together. A lot of history there. And a little bit about why Wimbledon is so special. Some unique, interesting facts that hopefully you guys are enjoying to hear about. And we also covered the open era and what marked the transition. So a ton of information here going back in history, but it's a great way for us to dig in and get us all aware and informed about this. So that brings us close to the topic of what we call the main slice of the Grand Slams in our first ever podcast.
Amazing. Well, I hope you enjoyed your Grand Slam dunk. That was very informative even to me. I learned all sorts of things in this process and just talking to you, Raghu. And I hope all you listeners found this equally interesting. If you learned something new or would like us to cover more stuff, do let us know.